Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lehmann Maupin, our new space. It is with extreme pleasure that I am sitting up here with these four women. My name is Anna Stothart. I am the curatorial director here at the gallery. I was formerly a museum curator at a couple of institutions, but
Let's name them.
Okay. Sorry, I was going to go into it, and I was like, nah, this doesn't feel right. Okay, I'll do it. So I worked at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston for the whole Helen Molesworth and Janelle Porter years. And then I worked at the San Antonio Museum of Art as the curator of modern contemporary art for a hot minute, which equaled 1 year. And then I ended up here. So here I am with the pleasure to introduce these lovely ladies. So I'm going to do quick introductions, and then we'll get into some conversation. At the end, I will leave time for a couple of questions if you have them, so hang on to them if you think of them during the conversation. Okay, so I'm going to start at the very far end and then work this way. So at the far end there is Susan Unterberg. So Susan was born in New York City and still lives and works in New York City. She is a photographer and a philanthropist who is, and most recently was announced as, the founder and patron behind the Anonymous Was a Woman grant. Since 1996, she has provided over 220 female artists over the age of 40 with $25,000 unrestricted grants, which is a big deal, a big deal. She, as I mentioned, is also a photographer in her own right. Her work has been featured in solo and group exhibitions at institutions such as the CAC in Cincinnati, the New Museum in New York, the Met, the ICP here in New York, International Center for Photography, and the Jewish Museum. Her work can be found in the collections of MoMA, the Met, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Jewish Museum, and the Nelson Adkins Museum. So that's Susan. Thank you for being here. And next we have Betty Tompkins. Betty was born in Washington, D.C. and lives and works in New York. She received the Anonymous Was a Woman Award in 2018. So she is our most recent recipient. She is best known for her photorealistic depictions of the female body, sexuality, and desire through paintings, drawings, photograph, and video work. Her work has been featured in solo and group exhibitions at the Kunstmuseum in Innsbruck in Austria, the Flag Art Foundation, the Sao Paulo Museum of Art, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Virginia, Dallas Contemporary, the Centre Pompidou, and the Serpentine Gallery. Her work is in the collections of the Brooklyn Museum, the Pompidou, and the Museum City of New York. So welcome, Betty. Next, we have Judith Bernstein. She was born in Newark, New Jersey, and lives and works in New York. We've got all of our New York living ladies here. She received the award in 2006. She is best known for her provocative paintings and drawings that have provided cultural, political, and social critique for over 50 years. Her work has been featured in solo and group exhibitions at the Drawing Center in New York, the New Museum, the Haus der Kunst in Munich, the Mumak Museum in Vienna, the Migros Museum in Zurich, the Whitney Museum in New York, the ICA in London, MoMA PS1, and the Hammer in LA. Her work is in the collections of the Brooklyn Museum, the Jewish Museum, MoMA, the Whitney, and the University or Yale University Art Gallery. Judith Bernstein. All right, and last but certainly not least is Cecilia Vicuña, who I have the pleasure of working with here at Lehmann Maupin. She was born in Santiago, Chile, lives and works in New York, though she does spend a lot of time in Santiago still. She received the award in 1999. She is a poet and an artist, and she is best known for her works that integrate practices of poetry, performance, conceptualism, and textile craft in response to pressing concerns in the modern world world, including ecological destruction, human rights, and cultural homogenization. Her work has been featured in solo and group exhibitions at the Brooklyn Museum, the MFA Boston, the Berkeley Museum and Pacific Film Archive, CAC New Orleans, the Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes in Santiago, the Drawing Center, the Hammer, and she was in Documenta 14 and the 18 Sydney Biennial. Her work is in the collections of the Tate Gallery in London, the Guggenheim, the Blanton Museum in Austin, the MFA Boston, and MoMA. So please join me in welcoming all of these ladies. Okay, so since what brings us all here is, and I should just say briefly what does bring us all here, is that Susan and I were seated next to each other at a dinner, and Cecilia was at the same table, and we started talking about all of the work that she's done to support women artists, and thought, let's make this like a formal conversation. Let's invite other women who have received the grant and talk about what it is to make art as a woman. And so I kind of wanted to start there with a question for Susan, for those who don't know and didn't read the articles. But what motivated you to start the grant, and why did you choose to remain anonymous until just recently?
Well, first of all, I want to
microphone.
I want to thank, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's on. I think you just have to.
Okay, I want to thank the gallery, Lehmann Maupin, for hosting this, and especially Anna and Joseph, who was the coordinator, and these wonderful women who have agreed to be part of the conversation. So thank you all. And since I went public, it's astounding to me the response that the grant has had, which is wonderful and amazing. So one of the goals in going public was to make this, as we were once called, a demure grant, more recognizable, and most of all, to honor the people who have received grants. And I could go on and on.
Yeah.
But anyway, but the impetus for starting Anonymous in 1996, the NEA stopped giving grants to individual artists. And I thought I had just inherited half of my father's foundation, and I wanted to do something that was mine and not just give money to something that already existed. And the need seemed to be crucial at this point. And since I was a mid-career female artist, and I knew firsthand how hard it was for most artists to get grants and survive, it seemed like the perfect vehicle for me. And grants of this kind weren't being addressed elsewhere. And did you ask why I decided to stay anonymous?
Yeah.
It was easy. Since I was an artist, trying to get my career going, I thought that being a philanthropist would certainly change the way people looked at me. And most of my friends were artists and in scholarly, teachers or whatever, and it just wouldn't have worked. And I went to a lot of artist colonies, and if I had been outed, you can only imagine they would have only wanted the grant, which the setup for the grant is I don't choose them, and they're done by a panel, and the panel of nominators. So it's all very secretive, but it remains secretive except for me now.
Yeah.
And you want me to go on?
No, that's great. That's great. Perfectly answered. Perfectly answered. And now, on the same topic, I wanted to ask each of the other recipients, actually, sort of, what did receiving the grant, how was it transformative for your work at the moment that you received it? And so I'm actually going to start with Cecilia, because you received it in 1999, and then we'll sort of move that direction to see sort of, what kind of work were you making in that time, and what was the impact of the grant on your practice?
It's weird, these things. They look like your work. They do. Yours and yours. But okay, other than that, 1999. Well, I was mostly an unknown, anonymous artist most of my life. So I think, I imagined I would remain so for most of my life. But in the late 90s, an extraordinary lady showed up in my life, and that was Catherine de Zegher. Do any of you remember Catherine de Zegher? Yes, I don't see many hands. It's a pity,
We had to raise our hands.
Right, but I hope she's well known enough because she did this extraordinary exhibition called Inside the Visible. Do you remember that exhibition? It started, I believe, in 1996, 1997, and that was the first important feminist exhibition that was worldwide, included me, among many artists that got the first viewing as a world category sort of person for that show. And after that, I was suddenly in the Whitney Biennial, and of course my work was completely ignored because I made a sort of invisible piece. But after that, invisibility works in mysterious ways. And so I did this exhibition. I was invited to do an exhibition that I call CloudNet, that would be traveling through different alternative spaces of the US. And at the time, I think just before, what month did you give the award back then?
It was usually in the fall, but a couple of years it was in the spring.
I see. So let's imagine that I received it in the fall, okay? And so I think, because when I was trying to remember, I knew sort of that you would be asking what happened in 1999, so I had to remember. And one image came to me that I want to bring to you. I decided to do a cloud net, which is an image of bringing the clouds to protect the earth from the destruction that we are bringing to the earth. Meaning, the proposal was that we would be weaving a cloud of nets to protect the earth from global warming. And so I did this exhibition, and it received some wonderful reviews, but the ecological aspect of it was completely and fully ignored. And so I did a performance, an improvised performance, like all my performances, at the pier, just at the foot of the World Trade Center. And when we constructed the video of this performance, you see the following image. My hands going like that, with some thread behind it, the World Trade Center, and on top of it, just like very much like the sort of poem that you had, Betty, in the piece that is showing here, a little poem. And what the poem said is, we will all go away unless a new net worth is born, the worth of the net of life itself. This was done 1999. And next thing was 2001, the World Trade Tower were gone. So I remember the first time I showed that video was the day after September 11th. That's what you gave me the award for.
Oh, good.
Oh. Judith?
I had got the award in 2006, and at that time I was teaching part-time at a college at SUNY Purchase, and I have to say that my career was dead in the water, and this was not what I was hoping for. You know, I wanted a bigger life than I had, by the way, than this part-time teaching job. And I was very lucky because when I had gotten the award, it was a psychological boost to me. It was enormous. I was valued, and my work was valued, and this was a very big thing. In addition to the fact that obviously you get a monetary reward, which is not a small thing, but and at that time that was a great deal of money for me, and it gave me a boost. And I did a piece a little later than that. That was this giant drawing of my own signature, and it was about stardom, it was about fame, it was about women at the center, it was about male posturing, and it was also about my own ego. And this was something that I did at a place called the Hillwood Art Museum. It actually is a part of an academic institution, but later on they elevated it to a museum. But nevertheless, I had always done political work, and my life was really about, it was autobiographical, but my work was really about sexuality and politics. And it was also about my rage at injustice, which was a very important thing for me in my whole lifetime. And I had started out doing these drawings and paintings when I was a student at Yale in 1966. That was Fuck Vietnam. And I was furious about the war. I was not the only one. You know, it was a big deal at that point in time because they had a draft. So I started with these very large pieces, the Fuck Vietnam pieces. Then later on, I did the screw drawings. The screw drawings had to do with, they were about sex, they were about anti-war, and they were about feminism. And mine was bigger than yours. So we have that. Then I did this large signature piece, which was about fame and stardom. And after that, I started doing these Birth of the Universe pieces. And women were actually at the center. They were equated with the Big Bang. And I'm also doing now not only the birth of the universe, but also the death of the universe. And so I have this trajectory. Also, I'm doing another series that has some humor in it called Blue Balls, which has all those manifestations. I had a show recently at the new museum, at the Drawing Center. I forgot where I had the show. I had the show at the Drawing Center. I'm sure I had it there. Anyway, it was recently at the Drawing Center, and it was a Cabinet of Horrors. And it was against Donald Trump, who I detest beyond comprehension. Yeah, absolutely, by the way. There's nothing good about this man. So I did this large show, and of course he's such a con artist, and so many people are so much against Donald Trump at this point, and it's kind of, it's snowballing. And then I also had a show which was a fluorescent show, a black light show at Paul Kasman, and that show was called Money Shot. So I had that in the crude sense of the word, and also about using Donald Trump as an image. And I had Trump and Schlong and Putin Schlong and Kim Jong-un Schlong. There was not enough Schlongs in this place. So I used all these images, and they were funny, but they were dead serious. And I had one piece that was a cash machine, which is very much because Donald Trump has this Atlantic City big cash machine, and it had a lever that was a phallus, and it also had three schlongs in a row, like a what are they? A slot machine kind of thing. A slot machine, three schlongs in a row, and on top of it, I also used a lot of Americana, which he fucks with, and also the White House. The Capitol, and on top of the Capitol, a flag. So I used a lot of all the Americana that Donald Trump was about. But nevertheless, the grant started me off, and it gave me the impetus to keep going. And that's what's the most important thing, is actually to keep going. And it's very hard to do that when you're in an anonymous situation. I did it because I didn't know what else to do, I'll be honest. You know, I had no other skill practically except teaching. And, but nevertheless, this grant helped me a great deal and started me going. And I have to say that this is the best time of my life because my work is valued and I'm valued. So this has been a great trajectory for me. And I can't thank you enough, Susan. I really can't thank you enough.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. Yay.
Yeah.
Now, as our most recent recipient,
Yes.
Betty.
My check's only been in the bank for about 2 weeks.
Is it spent? Is it spent?
And what I am doing with it, having deposited it, I am going to pay a year's maintenance with it, so I will have zero concern about how to pay the rent. Ivan Karp used to say rent is the only reality, so my reality is thank you so much. I'm not worrying about this till 2020. As for my work, I'm in the middle of several series. I just had a show at PPOW that was called Will She Ever Shut Up? And the show was 100% combining images with combining text. And the front room was a group of pages ripped from art history books, of which I covered the women in them with words used and phrases and stories used to describe women. This is the reality we all live in. We all live with the language that is defining us, or we fight against the language that is defining us because we want to be something else. That room also had in it the first of a group of apologias that I'm doing. The Me Too movement and my interest coincided with a big bang, which has never happened to me before. People always say to me, oh, you're so ahead of the times. I'm not ahead of the time. You can only be in your time. I was just rejected by my time over and over. But then I got this idea. I said every day, I'm looking at these women's stories and these lame-ass men's excuses for an apology. So I called them the apologias. And they are quotes by many of the men who have been in the newspaper with their stupid-ass apologies. The middle room is a room that I called Insults and Laments, and they were cunt images with text overlaid on them. So when I did the original group of women words, which I showed at Flag, and I showed at Gavlak Gallery, we laid out on a table push pins, markers, and index cards. So people could, it was sort of like a play it forward sort of thing, because I wanted the series to be interactive in a way. The language that I used in the original 1,000 women words were all given to me by email or in person or on social media. I just put out a call for it, and I got over 3,000 unique words and phrases and stories in over 7 languages. And so I was just the channeler. You know, they sent me whatever they were going to send me. I put it on a master list. I discard the original email so everybody has anonymity and that they're protected. And so I wanted to continue that idea. And when both shows were over, they took all the cards and sent them to me. And a year passed, and I had not even opened the packages. So one day I thought I should see what they said. I don't really remember. So I opened them, and they were so much worse than the original words and phrases and stories sent to me. And it was because they had total anonymity. You know, I would not even have an email address to discard. They could just say anything. So I started going through them, and one said, I'm going to Jackson Pollock all over her face. For one thing, it's funny, and it's an art reference, and it's really gross. So I said, oh, this is getting really interesting to me. So I went through and I picked a bunch of them, and I said, well, I have to do something with them. And I had no idea what, because when I finished with the women words on canvas, I was so done, I threw out the last 10 that I did. I didn't like them, so it was gone, you know? When it's gone, it's like, it's gone. So I was working on these book page pieces, and I thought, well, I don't want to just incorporate them into this. They're too gross. They have to be their own thing. So I did these cunt images with the language embedded into the image, and that series is about ready for a little jiggle here and there. I'm continuing it, but I have to do something else because I'm working on the 15th one now, so it's now time to blow up the idea again. One of the things that I really, really, really like to do is to blow up ideas. You grow an idea, you get an idea, and so you're curious, and you go in and you do something, and usually it's terrible, and so you do it again. And maybe it's not so bad, and when you hit it the third time, all of a sudden, here's this idea, it has grown. And then it's something that I can work with, which I really like to do. So that's what I'm going to do with your money. Thank you.
Okay, so I think, I find it interesting. We often talk about political art, and I'm very curious because I think it's used with a broad stroke, and so I think it's often attached to all of your work and, of your own doing, but also external. So I'm interested to know, what does political art mean to you? What does making political art mean? And Susan, I'll start with you.
To keep the focus on Anonymous,
Yeah.
but my own work is definitely political. It began, I think, giving a grant that gives women voices and women honoring other women is a political act today, and it was then, but even more so today. Yeah. And I think that the NEA and politics certainly, had something to do. And the time we live in with Trump, I'm completely with you. Yes. Things have gotten so bad for all of us, probably. But he's devalued art in a way that has never happened in this country. And that was one of the reasons I chose now to come out and be a spokesman for my own grant, and women can't be anonymous anymore, and we have to have our own voices. Yeah. And my work has always been political. I became an artist, a real artist, in the period of feminism, and the personal was the political, and my work started out by being about families, but in a not the most loving kind of way. I was looking at family relationships, from an honesty, and now it's done all the time, but it wasn't then. And now I'm doing very blatantly political work, but unlike you ladies, it has a humor to it, but it's they're self-portraits. And I'm trying to show how Trump has dismantled the government in the time he's been in office. And my newest series is Fantasy America, what I'd like to have happen, but it's the same format. So that's me in a nutshell.
And Cecilia.
Political, yeah. There's probably nothing that is not political. Even breathing is a political act right now. And I was thinking, what is the most radical decolonial act that one can do today? And I think it's exactly what you have been doing. I believe that, let's say, we don't know if it was around 10,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, that the devaluation of the mother, the devaluation of the female side of the universe began to be completely devalued, persecuted, massacred, and actually my partner and I were writing a book about this, which is like a follow-up of my documenta work and the work that we did together also over there. And so the more we go into this, you come to the realization that the most radical thing that we can do as women is to sort of snap out of this secret complicity, secret compliance with the system. The system doesn't want for us to realize that we are at the gravest moment of the history of humanity, that life for the whole of humans may disappear very soon, much sooner than we want to acknowledge. And to snap out of that state of compliance means to do acts of solidarity and generosity and beauty with each other, with all others, animal, non-animal, men, women, all the sexes, but especially and radically between women. I don't know about you, but I am an Indian, a South American Indian, and I have to tell you, my mother was an Indian, and when she knew that she had given birth to a girl, she cried because she had failed to produce a male heir. I know this because some of my aunts told me this story, but I have to tell you, I felt it coming out of the womb. I felt received by the disappointment around my naked little body. And I came out from that mother's womb with my hands like this. Actually, all babies do, like that. But what is this gesture? It's a gesture not of attack. It's a gesture of readiness, you know, to come to this life, to this being. And so I think of such sorrow that women around the world have to feel that. And that I have been attacked, persecuted, marginalized, censored all my life, mainly by guess who? Women. Women feminists, women that are revolutionaries, women that very rarely women on the conservative field had even bothered to notice that I exist. But women who should have been my allies all along have been deadly enemies of my art, of my being, of my person. And I know that when I tell this, this is a universal experience. So we really must snap out of that and do as you have done, Susan, with acts that are, you ask how transformative the award was. There's no words to say that. I mean, to receive, I can tell you the moment that I received the award, it was like this. Someone on the phone said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yes." You have just received an award of, was it 25,000, wasn't it? Ha ha ha, I said, yes, yes, and what did you get? And I thought it was a friend pulling my leg. That's how outlandish and outrageous it was. Nobody had ever done an act like that for me. No one, you know, so radical, so.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Your work is very well known. You know, you've had shows all over the world and all. Who did respect your work? Was it men?
Some women.
Okay.
And usually the women who believed in my work were attacked themselves. You see? So I don't mean to make this like a personal story because I have always encountered both the attack and the support, always, you know. But since we're speaking of what is political is to change that correlation, to change that the presence of that erosion of each other. You know, because the erosion, the distortion of the relationship, I think that is really the most political act, that we see the quality and the beauty of the exchange of every relationship as a political act. Because that then has the effect of extending and replicating itself with beauty and power, empowering each other. So,
yeah. Judith, what do you think?
You know, you're aware as a woman, and when I was I came from a very small town in New Jersey, very bourgeois background, very middle class, and a place called Bradley Beach near Asbury Park, a suburb of Asbury Park, and I came from a very small town. Then I went to Penn State as an undergraduate. At Penn State, there were 3 men to every woman at that period of time. Now, of course, there are more women than men who go to Penn State. Then after that, I went to Yale, and when I went to Yale, it was an all-male school. So you're very aware of the fact of the power system. You're just aware of it. And then when I left Yale, I came to New York, and you hit a glass wall, glass ceiling, or whatever. And what you're involved with is that women did not have a chance to show at many galleries. So myself and other women got together, and we started AIR, the first women's gallery. And that was just the right time to do that. And it was a political act, of course. And it was just the right time. And it was so long ago, but nevertheless, it was just right. Now, I'll tell you frankly, my own work in terms of politics and feminism is that it's not only feminist, it's about the human condition. It's a cliche in a certain way, but it's observing male behavior. So when I was doing these very large drawings of screws, the subtext was like a Jackson Pollock. It was like a big penis under there. So many shows that were feminist shows, I was rejected from too, because it was not self-referential. And a lot of women felt that that was not feminist if it was not self-referential. Now, it's a bigger picture. Now I'm also I did a lot of paintings that were the birth of the universe, which I used cunt face, by the way, and I love using these crude terms because it takes off the onus and it also punches it out. And I love the humor of a lot of the work that I do. But nevertheless, I started out when I was a student at Yale. I had gone into, I had read an article in the New York Times. It's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, was taken from bathroom graffiti. And when I saw that, I thought, you know, that's really some insight. And I went to the bathrooms at Yale, and of course it was an all-male school at the time, and saw a lot of anti-Vietnam, other kinds of things, very crude scatological graffitis, and it was also a lot of fun. It was also me looking at the guys and having a good time. And so I also found that there was a certain amount of, when people are defecating, it's liberating in a certain way, and not only that, it's completely anonymous. So they're writing down one thing, writing down another, et cetera, like tweets. So I used a lot of that information. I had, for example, a man flying through the air with a big, with a cape, Superman with a cock 3 times the size of the guy. But a lot of it I actually made up. But once you get the idea what graffiti is about, you do that. So I started out doing that, and then I went to pieces that were like the fun gun, which was an anatomical drawing of a phallus with a trigger and also 45 bullets in the nutsack and also coming out the urethra. So and not only that, my work has a lethalness to it. It has a humor to it, and I've kept that going. But I actually did work all the time for myself. The fact that recently I've gotten recognition, which is, by the way, fabulous. Don't misunderstand me. I am not for anonymity at all, by the way. I see nothing good about anonymity. So I would say that this is really an extraordinary thing. People talk about anonymity because they say you're not pressured to do the same things in terms of sales. That was never the case with me. No one was pressuring me to do a goddamn thing, and no one's pressuring me now to do anything. It's just that I do what I want to do, and that's the reward that I'm getting. Now, obviously, it's wonderful to be selling work too. There is an economic factor involved. But nevertheless, this is a wonderful time for me, but my work is political in a very direct way because it's not only my own experience, but it is also the experience that's around me, and also the power structure that women, of course, of my generation are very aware of. And of course, other generations are aware of it too, don't misunderstand me, but nevertheless, we actually, with my generation, we did something about it, starting a gallery, et cetera. Yeah.
Betty.
I don't know if I've even answered the question.
You did.
But I just
You did.
went on, by the way, guys. No one stopped me. That was a good point.
There's no right answer to these questions.
The closest I got to Yale was, remember then when they had the summer of your junior year, they had that summer program at Yale?
Yes. You know something? I knew nothing about it at the time.
Well, I was unanimously voted by the painting teachers at Syracuse to be that year's Yale student, and the dean of the school, Schmeckebeer was his name, said,
well, that was
"Isn't
appropriate.
she the one who wears blue jeans? Dirty blue jeans? We can't send her." So I didn't go to Yale. Yeah, I grew up differently than other people here. My parents were very involved in left-wing politics. My father was the head of the Progressive Party in Philadelphia, and I was followed to school by the FBI for many, many, many years. And I could spot them. I was in the first grade, and I would say, "There's one!" And I said, "Don't point!" So I grew up outside of the I need approval sector. I was always outside that. So when I came to New York, I was bored going around to the galleries. It was a very small art world then. It was 57th Street between Madison and 6th Avenue, and then up and down Madison Avenue from about 53rd Street up to 86th Street, where Alan Stone was, and for maybe a half a block every once in a while. That was the whole New York gallery scene. So one Saturday afternoon a month, you could see everything. So I did, including the schlock, which there was a lot of. And I was extremely bored with what I was seeing. And that irritated me because I would say, this guy, and it was always a guy, spent 2 years working on these paintings, and you're out of here in under 5 minutes. Sometimes walk in the door, look around, and leave. And I said, this is not what interests me. I don't want to do paintings like this. So I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted, but I knew it was nothing like what I was seeing. There were a couple galleries like Castelli's, like Sidney Janis. I loved every show that I ever saw there, but most of it, it was like, oh, go away, please. Do I have to look at this? So one day I was looking at my first husband's porn collection. He was 12 years older than I was, and so the porn came with him. And in those days, you couldn't get these things through the mail. The U.S. mail system was extremely conservative, and you could get arrested for shipping porn through the mail. It was a federal offense. So what he did before he met me is he lived in Washington State, and he went up to Vancouver, and he rented a postal box, sent away his check with the postal box address, and sent it off, waited an appropriate amount of time, drove over the border, picked it up, stashed it under the cushions of his car, and hoped he looked like the all-American boy, and drove back. And so he had this collection. And I was looking at them one day, and I said, you know, if you take off the heads, the hands, the sheets, you know, all this stuff, get down to the money shot. What do I got? So I took pieces of paper and I started blocking them off, and I said, this is it. This is what I've been looking for all along. This is it. It's abstract, and I had been trained as an abstract expressionist. So I knew what I was looking at that way, and I said, this is abstractly beautiful, and it has charge. And that's what I wanted. I wanted the charge, and I wanted the abstract paintings. And so we had an Econoline van at the time, and the biggest you can fit into an Econoline van is 7 feet by 5 feet. So that was the size, you know? It's all very practical here. And I started the Fuck paintings that week. And it went on for quite some time. When I had around 3 or 4 of them done, I asked a couple people to my studio. And the first person who came, who was a dealer, walked in, and my studio was the part of the bedroom not occupied by the bed and the dresser. So about 5, 6 feet between the edge of the bed and the wall of the room. This was Columbia University student housing, which I'm sure they haven't changed one bit since 1969. And the first dealer who came in, he walked in the room, he took one look at this painting, and there was another one there was like this. That's all you could see. And he ran out of the room, and then he backed in. And so I was looking at him, and I was thinking, what have I done to elicit this kind of response? And of course, he rejected me entirely, as did everybody else. And I would go around, I knew that the art world was social. I don't know what that meant to me at the time. I don't even know what social meant in 1969. I was pretty sure I wasn't it, but anyway, I would talk to people in the galleries, and I would try to go to some openings. So all of them said to me the same thing. I would say to them, I'm working on a series of paintings that I would like to show you. I only have a few done. When I have enough that I feel that it's representative and that the idea is developed, may I bring in slides? Remember slides?
Yes.
Good. If you don't know what a slide is, it's 2 by 2 inch transparency in a cardboard sleeve. That's a slide. And so they all said, come back in 10 years when you found your voice, where I felt I was pretty well shouting it out at that moment. And then most of them, almost all of them said, and don't bother coming back then, we don't show women. Period. That was it. So when I'd been told that enough times that I could accept this for a fact, I had to figure out how I might deal with it. And it seemed to me that there were two responses to this situation. The first response was to be crushed, which I thought was the intent of the remark. The second one was to be liberated, and that's how I felt. Nobody gives a shit, I can do whatever I want. And I did. And I've done so ever since. When I was accepted into the feminist database at the Brooklyn Museum, they asked me to make a statement.
Can I ask when that was?
Huh?
When was that?
Oh, 7, 8 years ago, I think.
Okay.
Okay?
Just curious, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I knew who the person was who was running it on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I went through it and I said, well, why aren't I here?
Ah.
So I sent her a message and said, why are I not in this database? And she wrote me back and she said, you should be. And she invited me. So I did it. But one of the things they ask you to do is to make a statement about feminism and your relationship to feminism. And what I said is, I'm really against categorization. This is from my political upbringing, you know? I would see people come to blows over the definition of a word that didn't affect anything. And I said, I'm against it as a rule, but I am seeing such backlash already with younger people. They have no awareness of how what they take for granted, like birth control, abortion rights, how quickly it can disappear in front of them. None at all. And I said, so I've changed my mind about this, and I am a feminist. Because when I thought about it, I said, well, what's your choice? You're a misogynist or you're a feminist? Are you a misogynist? No. So then you're a feminist. So I think it's always been for women a political statement to make art, to do things that you believe in for yourself, not follow a trend, but just to do it, whether there's a market for it or not. In my case, I let the market find me, and which, thank God, they did.
But I do think that, especially all of you up here, yes, I agree that making work as a woman and you know, making sort of placing yourself in certain positions as a woman is a political act. However, I think all of you made very sort of specific decisions at times that it was not popular to portray very specific types of
Absolutely.
Sexuality, of femininity. I mean, even Cecilia, the paintings that she did in the 1970s, you know, some of those were destroyed or thrown away because of the type of sex that they portrayed. And I think all of you have done the same thing, but to the detriment of your own career.
You pay a very high price for doing work
Yes,
that's
you
sexual.
do.
You think, by the way,
you get to teach adjunct at 5 schools at the same time.
Yeah. No, but but I do think that that's something, I think, in particular about all of you, I think that I really admire is that it was never about the market. It was never about, I mean, even though you say success and fame.
It's a really good habit to get into, is to not think about the market when you work.
Yeah.
You know, I was really fortunate when I was a senior at Syracuse. They got their first visiting artist of my entire stay there, and it was James Rosenquist. And one of the things that he said was, when you're in your studio, it's the art, it's only the art. When you go out of your studio, it's the business. So for me, there I was at the age of 21, hearing what was probably one of the most important things ever said to me, and having that division in my mind that I do this for its sake.
Yeah. You know, when I've done studio visits over the course of my career, you know, artists will ask, you know, how do you make it, especially, you know, I would do undergrad studio visits, things like that. How do you make it as an artist? And I said, well, you know, there's no rule book. You know, you could even be a white male abstract painter and not make it. It is possible, just particularly today. I apologize to all of the white male abstract painters out there. But I think that, so I tell them, like, if you want to be an artist, it's the most difficult career to choose. My father is an artist. You may never see success. You may never receive recognition. So you have to do it because you cannot imagine doing anything else, period. And then they kind of look at me and say, thank you for killing my dreams. You're welcome. They're like, what about Jeff Koons? He just realized his fame. It's like, yeah, well, that's...
You know, it's a reality check. And the thing here is that it should be something that they understand, because then there's a feeling that they are not a success, when actually, if you can exist within the art world in some way, that's also teaching and a lot of things. And being in New York, New York's a very expensive city. I don't have to tell anyone here. And also, you have the extraordinariness of seeing so much art, and a lot of it is very fine, in addition to work that's not. But there is it's an extraordinary thing to be able to live here and to be able to work, and that's a reward in itself. I know it's not the reward that many people want, but it is a reward.
Yeah, and I do agree that I think, you know, as Cecilia was saying, that while as women, that we really do need to support each other, and I think this is a perfect example of what can be achieved by that, but also, you know, that we are our own worst critics. I think that, you know, especially the women who have had to pull up their bootstraps and really fight, I think it's hard to be supportive at times, and so I'm also, you know, mindful of that. But I am personally grateful for the strength I see and power in women in this field at this moment. As more and more women are becoming directors, more and more women are chief curators. I mean, I had the fortune of only ever working for female directors and chief curators. All female staffs. I don't know what I would do in another environment. But anyway, so I'm very thankful for that. But I do see, I think that you are all right, and I think that the work that you make is important because we are in a moment of crisis, and our rights are at stake. And I think you're right, thinking about birth control and abortion. I think that all of that is at stake. And so thank you for the work that you make, all of you. And I think with that, I think with that, I wanted to be able to open it up to a few questions, but I also wanted to give you all an opportunity to ask each other questions if you so choose. So you may raise your hand with the rest of the group if you would like. But yes, so please, questions, yeah. Oh, I'll just do it because I'm closer.
I have a question for all of you. I was very curious about the art support group, meaning artists supporting each other. I think you guys talked about the lack of support outside of the community of artists, and I wanted to know if you felt it at the time.
I'll start. I didn't have one. When Soho was really starting up, I lived on 120th and Broadway. So I really just didn't know anybody. And as a result of my upbringing in politics and what had happened to me because of that, by the time I was in my 20s and living in Soho, I was no longer a joiner. And then nobody asked me. That was my circle. I would have liked to have had it at that time. It would have meant so much to me. I had a very critical husband. I had parents who didn't particularly want to have an artist daughter. I didn't know very many people, so I supported myself. I rah-rahed myself through it. And it was hard. It was often hard. But I really, when I decided that my reaction to all of this rejection was to feel liberated instead of crushed, I set up a mindset for myself where I could see all of this as a good thing. The other thing, of course, when I was a student, nobody went from grad school into a gallery. It didn't happen to anybody of any gender. You know, we were taught about the abstract expressionists who had their first shows in their 40s and their 50s or later. Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg, they were in their 30s, you know, they weren't in their 20s. Frank Stella, I think historically, was the first artist to go from grad school direct into the gallery system. And he was the only one. He didn't start a trend. He was like the big exception. And therefore, we should all accept him as this brilliant male genius. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay.
You know, I had a lot of support for friends who were feminists, and also, so I had, you know, it was a time of these CR, you know, meetings and things like that. But I would say that there were a lot of women. First, I was in a gallery of all women, and I also had friends who were outside that gallery. So I had that support. I had no economic support, but because I had a couple degrees, I did teach all the time. So I taught part-time at a lot of schools. So that's how I made a living for many, many years, because I came from a background that didn't have economic support for you. But I would say that at that time, it was very cheap. When I came to New York, and this is 1967, I had a loft that was $175 a month. So therefore, and you have, you know, maybe 1,800 square feet. So it's a different time frame. But I had a lot of support from friends, from female friends. So that was good. I had some support also from male friends too. So don't misunderstand me. It wasn't only female friends. But there was so little to go around that was hard for women in certain ways to bond and to recommend other women. They did, but it was harder for them than it was for guys to recommend other men, you know. And they were also, I think that men were used to having sports and bonding in another kind of way. That's my interpretation. I don't know if that's, you know, I say it like it's a big authority, but nevertheless, there's a certain amount of that's true. But nevertheless, but I did have friends who were supportive, and that was great. So we went around to the galleries all the time on Saturdays, and it was a social scene. It was loft parties, and it was, but it was not something, as Betty was saying, that you expected to have a lot of success right away. It was something that, you know, it was just beyond you, you know, kind of thing. And it was also not anything that universities would talk about, you know, or even discuss. So even if you, the
closest they got to that was to say, well, we're teaching you all the basics, and when you graduate, forget all this and start all over.
But didn't there also, like, I know for Cecilia too, that there were, go ahead, there were, like you built groups around yourself as well.
Yeah, I would say about the support question, two things, you know. I was born in Chile, which is probably the most male chauvinist country in the world, but I'm sure every country feels exactly the same. So it's not a particular award or anything like that. But I would say that I became adept from the very early age to hearing the sort of hidden messages that important women in your life were sending out. So I think for a woman, you have to develop an extra antenna to feel and connect with where the power is coming from. For example, my two grandmothers, you would look at them from the outside and you would see submissive women. But you would really look at them and you would see two great artists who have managed to survive and keep their spirit. I remember being a young girl and learning, for example, I was a poet, I read absolutely everything around me, and I would have an antenna to find women where you would very rarely see a woman in the 50s or in the 60s, anywhere, not just in the art world, but in books, in poetry, literature, philosophy, anywhere. So you develop a sort of hunger, a thought root, what I'm trying to say, a mix between thirst and thought, you know, that seeks out where the power is. You can find it in ancient history, you can find it in archaeology, you can find it everywhere you look. But the first experience I had of a real support group made of actual women was in New York. I came to New York in 1980, invited to do a performance by a most secretive, how you pronounce, a group of people that were Chilean poets in exile in New York. They only found each other, and somehow in their antennas they could pick up when other exiled Chilean poet persecuted by the military would be going around, and that's how I arrived in New York. Nevertheless, a few days after that, I met Lucy Lippard, and Lucy Lippard immediately invited me to join Heresies Collective. And I have to say that that experience was a life-changing experience. These ladies gathered once per week, if I remember correctly, to discuss for a whole year one single issue. And so we did, and we discussed for hours. And I had never been to a group of women where everybody disagreed on absolutely everything, but disagreed with beauty, with respect, without, demeaning the other. That's why I brought up the issue of demeaning the other. It is so easy to demean the other, and we are not even aware of what that does that, And so I think if we're thinking of resistance may be futile. Futile, that's how you pronounce. But nevertheless, it doesn't matter that it may be futile as long as you keep at it, And to keep at it is the only thing that will empower you through empowering others. And this is the web of life. This is what we have to do. And if we're lucky enough to find even one or two women to join each other in this beautiful disagreement, I highly recommend it.
Can I say something too? I didn't get a lot of support growing up. Well, I didn't come from a family that valued the arts, knew much about the arts. And I got married, dropped out of college, and eventually went back. So I was an older student, and I did go to graduate school. And unlike what you described, I did get a gallery immediately after. I thought, wow.
We don't hold that against you. I think it's great.
But
Someone gets
I
through.
don't have a gallery now, and I must say, I didn't really know how to, navigate the art world. And along the way, like when I was, in graduate school, I got a lot of support. And then I met Marcia Tucker, and we became instant friends. And I was her friend till the day she died. I saw her right before she died, actually. And she supported me a lot, but it was hard. But I didn't have a whole group of, I had some women friends, but
I'll tell you something, what I think is wonderful is because the people up here are saying that they had an enormous spirit. they were willing to go. They hear a lot of no's, but they were still willing to go on and on. And that's what you have to have. You have to have the belief that what you're doing is important, and it's important to you, and you have to get it out there, and you have to keep continuing. And that's a very important thing. And you don't hear, when you hear no, you said, fuck you. Right.
Exactly. Okay, I think one more question, and then, of course, we'll be able to mingle and you can ask questions directly. One more question. Anyone? Anyone? I mean, no pressure, but one more question? Anyone?
We have to beg. I see this right away.
I'm not sure this is a question, but I'm 68. I've had a lot of grants, a lot of opportunities. I really love what you're saying about that aspect of really pushing forward. You have a lot of people that tell you you can't do it, and a lot of times you think, how am I going to do it? But I remember going to Europe with a group of 4 other people, and I wanted to do something really big when I was 50. So I took out 5 credit cards, and I put $50,000 on them. I thought, I have no idea, as a single parent, how I'm going to pay this off. And about 2 months later, I got the Jackson Pollock-Krasner Award. So I want to thank you for, I'm hearing from everyone how much that means when you believe in yourself to have somebody else really offer that support. So I like the idea. Right now, I'm just starting. So 68 is just another beginning.
You're
I'm
a baby.
really excited.
All right. Yeah, one more question. Okay, okay.
This is for all of you. I personally get exhausted by all of this crap with the presidency and you know, now we have a government shutdown and now we have all of these people who are so hateful and they want to deny you your personhood. You know, sometimes I do get tired of my existence being politicized. Sometimes I just want to be. You know, do you feel this way? And if you do, how do you cope or how do you sort of manage that?
You know, it's funny because I did this series on Donald Trump, and I did this a lot of drawings on the Cabinet of Horrors, and then I also did a lot of paintings. But after that, I just had it. I couldn't stand hearing it. I couldn't stand listening to the news late at night. It would keep me up to 3, 4 in the morning. I would get so angry and so enraged that the country has gone to this point that it's a McCarthy of another time frame. And also you're talking Roy Cohn, and he was a lawyer for Donald Trump and a mentor for Donald Trump. And I was just sick with the fact of that's what the country has come to. Hopefully that things will turn out better. But I was terrified also that we could have a third world war and a lot of other things because we have someone who's obviously not capable, not an adult, and not capable of handling this. But I find that there, at a certain point, you just have to turn off, get into your own head, and do what you have to do, and let that go. It's very hard to do that because it's on the news every minute. It's in your face all the time. Every magazine, it's out there. Every newspaper, it's out there. Every quote, every idiotic tweet that comes out of someone who is so retarded, by the way, and so hateful, and so horrible, and such a horror that we have to listen to this. And someone who that represents the United States. It's a very sad comment, but I know there's, at a certain point, you just have to turn off. I don't have any more answers to that, but it's very, very hard. And it's hard to stay, it's hard not to hear all the stuff that's going on. Yeah.
I agree with you. In our house, we don't talk politics at dinner because I choke on my food. And I'd rather, I get so upset, that's it, you know, and then the meal's over, you're choking on your food. So my goal is to try and be alive and well when this is all over. So we talk about other things at dinner, and that's my solution. I try to stay informed by reading it, but I can't listen to it. It's too real when I listen to it. It's real. I think it's hard for all of us.
Yeah,
I'm 73, and I never thought I'd be at this stage of my life living through what we had just come out of when I was born. It's shocking.
I could say that you said something very beautiful. Do you remember the phrase that you said about someone attacking your personhood? I think that's the key. I remember reading once two things that come to mind as ways of finding again the strength, the force to continue. And one is an exercise devised by monks many years ago, hundreds of years ago, which is that when you have a doubt, you have to shoot the deepest doubt that you have. And let's say if this doubt is about your value or the significance of your life in this moment, shoot out this doubt as an arrow at such a speed that you get so acquainted with what that arrow is, where it's coming from, where it's headed, until you are so aware of it that you become like naked, like you become a non-person in the process. And going to that emptiness, to that complete sort of evacuation of expectation, you then encounter who you really are, you know, and in that emptiness of beauty is the real person. And only by being a real person, you already know it, you are going to be able to breathe the next breath, you know. And the other thought comes from the Guarani people of the rainforest in Brazil and Paraguay. As you well know, indigenous people around the world are being massacred, persecuted. The new government in Brazil has announced that they will be exterminated in order to destroy the forest. Destroy the forest means destroy the source of water and oxygen, not just for Brazil, for the entire planet, you see. So think of that. Do you know what they say about hate and about hateful speech? They say this phrase: hate is love divided. Meditate on that and see that even within hate there is still a core of transformation.
Okay, well, with that, please enjoy a beverage or two. Feel free to speak to these lovely women, ask more questions if you have it. And thank you so much for coming out on a cold night to Lehmann Maupin.